I invite you to find your seat.
Chilled them out on.
Just before we begin with the remainder of the agenda for this afternoon, I do have a further announcement to add to our memorials. I have just been informed that Bishop Eddie Marsh died about half an hour ago. Bishop Eddie is long remembered as being someone who was a mentor and an advisor to many clergy, and served in Newfoundland, particularly through the time of the separation into the individual dioceses. Much loved. So we will add his name to the others that were mentioned this morning, and the ones that were not included in the memorial that's in your docket will be certainly noted and included in the memorial at the next General Synod. Ask your prayers for Bishop Marsh's family and for all those who remember him in his ministry and his service to the church. General Synod is two things. General Synod is this body gathered in General Synod for discernment of the work of the national church, but we also talk about General Synod as the staff who work from Church House in Toronto and across Canada, and who carry out the work that you have given to them through what we are doing in a gathered General Synod. But they often work behind screens and closed doors and in Toronto, and if not able to travel, many times the rest of the church doesn't know who they are and what they do. And so for this General Synod, throughout it, we will be having a series of short videos of interviews with some of the key staff at General Synod talking about their department or their area of work and ministry, so that you have a sense of what is being done on your behalf, how it's being carried out, and the people who are doing it, most of whom are present with us during this General Synod as well. And so we begin with the first of the faces of General Synod.
I love all the staff equally.
Meeting and working with all kinds of people.
I love being inspired by donors.
Working with an incredibly talented and dedicated staff team.
Visiting dioceses, synods, parishes, and talking to people about faith and about the church.
What I love about my job is all the little details that go into making meetings happen.
My favorite part about my job would be helping people and learning how to find different strategies.
I love to travel.
I hear about what people are doing on the ground in their parishes and in their dioceses to really make the world a better place.
I work with such a wonderful array of people, talented, committed people. I'm very fortunate.
I learn so much because I learn from amazing people.
I love helping other people, whether it's a colleague or connecting with a parishioner or someone at a diocesan level.
Hugs, of course. I love hugging people.
I'm a numbers nerd. I like numbers. I like balancing, and I like reports.
Organizing things and describing things in detail and making them available to people.
Connecting with people.
I'm a people's person and I connect with people.
My absolute favorite part of the job is attending service. It just gives me peace.
Other than jumping over tall buildings in a single bound, I would say that my superpower is my obscure sense of humor.
Optimism.
I like to think that I'm really quite funny.
My superpower is
dangling modifier detection.
resilience.
If I was to say my superpower, I guess it would be I like to think of myself as a storyteller.
Other than being the best Nana ever, I would say my superpower is organization.
I say fly.
Teleportation.
I'm hilarious. Not stand-up comedy or hilarious, I'm just funny.
Well, I'm really generous, so I'm really good at giving a lot of time and energy to outside activities, not only work inside, but outside of my work.
Every time I adopt a dog or deal with dogs, for some odd reason they follow me. They call me the dog whisperer.
I would say my superpower is cooking. I really like cooking.
If you asked my nephew, he would say it's being an auntie, and I can't ask for something better than that.
My superpower is kindness, according to everybody.
Adaptability, patience also.
I'd say Jesus is my superpower. Without him, I can't do anything.
Claudia Alvarez.
That's a hard one because there's so many.
That is an impossible question to answer.
Everybody's my best work friends.
I would just say the entire team.
There's bishops in the House of Bishops, and there are people here in the office. I work closely with the General Secretary and with the Chancellor, so I can't say I'd pick one.
I mean, so many, of course, but I would say Betty because she's the first person I see. I see her every day.
The first person I see is Betty.
One that holds a very special spot for me is Betty.
I feel personally welcomed in by Betty. I'd say she is my work buddy who greets me.
During the pandemic, I was living alone, and she made a point to check in on me.
Gretchen Peterson from the ELCIC.
I do have a lot, but if I only have to pick one, I guess that would be Grace, because we work together for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
So much.
Holly Falcons, editor of the Journal. We lay out the paper together.
Our new poodle puppy is my best work friend.
Teresa Mandrix. My elder, she's local in Saskatchewan.
I get along pretty well with both my coworkers, I'd say.
My best work friend is God.
I love all the staff equally.
And special thanks to Anglican Video for pulling together all of those interviews. We move now to the next part of our legislative governance group, working group session. And the next part starts with a report from the governance working group and resolutions. So,
Yes, and you need to get out of the chair.
right. We're moving, to, first of all, to a resolution that has a direct impact on the work of the Primate, and so I'm going to ask the prolocutor to take the chair for this one.
So, Madam Prolocutor, the Governance Working Group's report to General Synod is report number 11, and it includes a description of the work that the Governance Working Group did, particularly with respect to motion C005 from the last General Synod, as well as which dealt with the to review the composition of the membership and rules of order and procedure of General Synod, bring forward any recommended changes. We've already dealt with some of those, the proposed, now the new rules of order and procedure. And the report also describes how Governance Working Group addressed those issues and that problem, those challenges by references to to COGS at 7 different meetings actually, 5 different reports, and the last report last report to COGS is contained in the report to General Synod. It's in the convening circular. The first motion for this afternoon is a motion to amend Canon 3, which deals with the primacy, to extend the term of office of the primate. The current rule is that the primate holds office until attaining the age of 70 and or effective date of resignation or the adoption of a resolution declaring the primacy vacant. And this motion, the idea of this motion arose some time ago before the election of Archbishop Nichols as our primate. Several of the diocesan bishops who could have been candidates were approaching 70, and they asked the question, well, could they stay on beyond 70, or could they, what would be the effect of their turning 70 either during their first triennium or in a second or third triennium? And that focused our attention on the situation that we're addressing, namely that a primate who attains the age of 70 within a year of the commencement of General Synod could have their term of office extended to the end of that General Synod. So it's just adding up to 12 months, but it depends on when the birthday falls, of course. And so the motion is that to amend paragraph 4C of Canon 3 to add the italicized words that the primate shall hold office until 1, attaining 70 years of age, provided if the next session of General Synod is scheduled to commence within 1 year of that date, the primate may continue in office until the prorogation of that session of General Synod. And if we don't adopt this, then our current rules provide that the senior metropolitan is the acting primate. Well, the senior metropolitan would continue to be metropolitan and would continue to be a diocesan bishop by definition. So that'd be 3 different portfolios for that interregnum that would occur. And in Governance Working Group's view, that is too onerous. It has happened, but we think it is not a matter of good governance. And as a matter of good governance, we think that we should just add very slightly to the term of a primate who is turning 70 within a year of the next General Synod to maintain the momentum, which would normally be 2 years would already have happened on a triennium, and in our case now it would be 3 years out of 4, and rather than interrupting that by having an acting just to continue it. There is a similar provision in the Constitution of the Ecclesiastical Province of Ontario, which extends the Metropolitan's term of office in exactly these circumstances. And in your material, there's a diagram that shows you this very small amount of time that would be added. I want to make it clear that Archbishop Nichols did not ask for this. She's not the originator of this, but because it could affect her, I mean, I don't know, when she turns 70, she might want to retire. Maybe she'd want to retire before that. But this could affect her, and as a result, the prolocutors chairing and Archbishop Nichols will neither speak to this nor vote. The procedure for adoption, because it changes a canon, it has to be approved at one session of General Synod by a 2/3 majority of each order voting separately. So I so move.
Thank you, David. Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah. So now I think what we need to do is ask if there, do you want to speak to it, Alan?
Under the rules that we've adopted, I'm able to defer speaking, and so I will defer speaking until later if necessary.
If necessary, okay, thank you. So are there anybody here who would like to speak to this motion? Okay, so for microphone number 2.
John Boyd, unreliable Lutheran who serves in the territory of the people, Kamloops. I speak against the motion only because for as long as I can remember, we've been told to think about the need for changing structures and the need for sustainability in the church as well as succession planning. And I realize that we've just come through COVID and we're all desperately trying to think of ways in which to continue doing what we do as the work of the church. However, the solution itself that we're being presented with here is to simply extend. And I realize that discussion on this will be very sensitive because it will be sounding like ageism, but my generation and younger were recruited to the church because we were told that we were desperately needed, and it's important. And quite frankly, it's high time for a generational shift so that new ideas and new voices can actually come in, because all of us are limited humans that only have a limited perspective. And we've, again, my generation and younger have been saying for years, we need to have some healthy turnover because Jesus did not intend a vacuum. So thank you.
Thank you. So, someone up, microphone number 1.
Jordan Ware, Diocese of Edmonton. I rise to speak neither for nor against this motion, but against the process by which we seek to adopt it. I feel as though a core principle of democracy is to have a free choice and the ability to vote according to my conscience. And I believe you, Canon Jones, both when you said today and in the pre-synod webinar, that this is not about Archbishop Nichols, that this is not something that has arisen just because of her, but because it is a live issue before us, then it puts pressure on us that we have to vote yes, or consign the senior metropolitan to this crushing burden of work in a time when we are all suffering under the crushing burden of too much work. Sometimes, of course, it is unavoidable that real-world consequences constrain our choices. I mean, budgetary votes are only the most obvious example. But this constraint, I feel, was avoidable. This synod could have been prepared to have an election if we voted no. Or it could have been presented in a triennium when it was not immediately applicable. And so I want to speak not either for or against the motion. It may well be the very best option that we have on the table, and I certainly don't mean to speak any word against Archbishop Nichols particularly. But I feel constrained in my vote because of the consequences if we vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
David Parsons, the Arctic. I will speak in opposition to this motion. One of the things about our Anglican Church of Canada, and as Anglicans, we do things decently in order. One of the things we do know is that there are provisions that have been made to make preparations. I'm 28, or 28, I wish I was. I'm 68. I wish I was. I wouldn't have to be calling for an election in 2 years. We will be having an election in the Diocese of the Arctic and for a new bishop, because I'll be turning 70. And I wouldn't want to ask my diocese, because I want to stay on, to change the canons. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what our Archbishop, our Primate, is doing, or David Jones, as he's so eloquently shared with us. But whoever the Metropolitan that would be next in line, like it or lump it, that's what, there's pressures on all of us. And we're well aware of what we're, at times at least, I'm not sure if I'm always aware of what I need to be doing. But so this should have been an electoral synod, General Synod, possibly. So I see you shaking your head. So, but anyways, I'll cease speaking. Thank you for the time to speak.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Laurel Dayhill, Diocese of New Westminster. I believe in the interests of creating a sustainable, stronger church in the future, we should be focusing on empowering and strengthening younger generations to take on leadership roles so that we can outlive the 2040 deadline that we've been given. Thank you.
Alan Perry?
Thank you, Madam Prolocutor. There's a key issue here, which is the question of the leadership of the General Synod itself. And we've just seen some of the faces of the other version of General Synod, which includes the staff of Church House, which is primarily the responsibility of the General Secretary. But the Primate also has a significant leadership role within that configuration, as well as the Council of the General Synod. I think to have somebody come in on an interim basis for a period of time to help run that puts that person in a very difficult position, and we've spoken to that, but it also puts those who are being led in a difficult position, having to help support someone who's really not signed up for that, having to continue to operate a Council of General Synod and the various committee infrastructure and the staff and so on for a significant period of time during an interregnum. All of us have been through interregna, whether in parishes or in dioceses, and you know it's difficult if you're between bishops or if you're between clergy. And so, in fact, it's really not about the Primate so much, in my view, so much as the effect of not having an effective Primate in place for a period of time. This is not an open-ended extension. This is an extension for a maximum of just under 12 months. And it allows for the orderly completion of the triennium to happen. That's the intent of this. So I will certainly, I've seconded the motion. My name is on it. I'll certainly vote in favor of it for that reason.
I'm not seeing any other people coming to a microphone. Mary?
Thank you. Mary Irwin Gibson, Diocese of Montreal. I understand that we're facing the horns of a dilemma, but I just want to point out that one doesn't simply find a suitable candidate for an election in a short time. That the House of Bishops spent 2 meetings, one in reflection on the role of a Primate, and another in reflection on who they would nominate. The candidates for Primate come from the House of Bishops after some deep thought and prayer. And even so, 5 good people allowed their names to stand for a job that I wouldn't choose to have. The job of a bishop is complicated. And the job of a Primate is even more complicated because it is someone who has a relationship with all the dioceses. I don't think we should hurry into this. I do think we should have younger bishops. I want to ask how long the younger bishops want to serve once they get the job, because it's a tough job to do. And I'm nearing 10 years, and the magic number when I too will exit and wave. But it's hard work, and it's hard work to lead a church that is facing change and is actually facing change, which lots of our churches have avoided doing for quite a few decades. So I don't think we need to rush into this, and I think we should buy ourselves some time. The second thought is, every time you want to have a synod, it costs a ton of money. Do you know what it costs for you to stay where you're staying? Then what's it cost to feed you for that period of time? Let's make the General Synods count when we meet, and not just have them to prove that we're in charge.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Joey Royal from the Arctic. I'm speaking in opposition to this, simply because, and I hear what our General Secretary said, but I just don't always think an interim is a bad thing. It can be give us space to discern the way forward and to find fresh ways of doing things, and that can be healthy at the parish level. I have no doubt that can be healthy at the national church level, so I'm opposed to this.
Microphone number 1.
Jay Coyle, Diocese of Algoma. I had no idea I'd be speaking to this, to be honest with you, till I've heard some conversation. I want to affirm a lot of things that have been said around the various generations and diversity in leadership and making room for new perspectives and new ideas. I affirm all of that. I don't necessarily equate that with age, however, because having worked with a lot of different ages in various capacities, with my current capacity in a diocesan position, in parish positions, and as a teacher of theology in a faculty of theology, I don't find the two are equivalent. So I affirm all of those things. I'm just not sure they actually are as relevant to this motion as we think they might be. And so I want to speak in favor of this motion because it enables us to have that consistency of leadership. It doesn't straitjacket us. It doesn't straitjacket the person who is in the primatial office, and it doesn't contribute to working against, in a sense, the kinds of things that have been affirmed here that I also want to affirm, but don't see as being directly related to age. So I intend to vote for this motion.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Rusilla Shaw, Diocese of Toronto. I would like to both speak in favor of this motion as we voted for Archbishop Linda, and I have great confidence in her ministry and have seen, as we have all from the report this morning, the great work that in spite of the pandemic, the Archbishop has been able to undertake and to see through, and I'm very grateful for that. I would also like to ask a question of the Chancellor around, does this set some kind of precedent for other dioceses in Canada, or what thought has gone into that? That's just a question I ask. Thank you.
So the province of Ontario, Ecclesiastic Province of Ontario, already has this provision. Other provinces don't, except that in Rupert's Land, the retirement age for bishops, everything about bishops is not a diocesan matter. You wouldn't be asking, Bishop Parsons wouldn't be asking his diocese to do this. It's the province that deals with it. And in the province of Rupert's Land, where I was the provincial chancellor, the retirement age is the last day of the 9th month after the month in which the bishop turns 70. It's what I call a degestation period. The other provinces, it's 70, but only is what I call a slip rule. This is just to deal with a short period of time because of the whimsy, in a certain sense, of when the person turns 70. And in the last primatial election, there were some people who might well have been candidates, but for the 70 rule, either meant they couldn't complete it one triennium, or they couldn't complete 2 trienniums. They didn't let their name stand. And in any event, this would not have been a primatial election, synod, because the next one would be in 2025, and all events, whether this is passed or not passed.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Microphone number 2.
Thank you, Gary Russell, Rupert's Land Diocese. I'm hearing some good points about, I totally agree that we need more youth involvement. And coming from an old timer, we need more young people doing what I'm doing here. But the but is, this is just an administrative measure dealing with the risk that we have that there's going to be a long period of time without effective primate leadership. And it's just an adjustment to reduce that risk and to reduce the period of time in which we might not have proper leadership. And I think it is only that. And that's why I prefer to vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Nancy MacLeod, Diocese of Ontario. I speak in favor of this motion. I hear what has been said about the need for newness and for youth, and I commend to the House of Bishops that consideration as they undergo that deep discernment and deliberation that Bishop Mary has spoken about, without limiting that to being an age-related matter. I speak to say that I see this clearly as not being, in any case, related to the person of our current primate. And I think we need to be clear about that this is about the system in which we manage this transition. I hear what has been said about the possibilities of things in interims. But clearly in this situation, we are not looking at intentional interims where we have someone who is being put in to undertake a particular role, but rather this is an additional burden that is being added to the senior metropolitan, which limits the efficacy of that being a really productive interim. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Microphone number 1.
Thank you, Madam Chancellor. Brittany Perkins, Youth Delegate for Diocese of Rupert's Land. I'm speaking for this motion. As a youth, I see no issue in someone who has completed 2 of the 3 years of a triennium finishing out their triennium, regardless of their age. They've already been there for most of the triennium. They may as well finish it out to bring us all into a nice conclusion of the triennium.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, what's that? Microphone number 2.
Philip Berry, Diocese of Ontario. I will vote in favor of this motion, but I have a question. Why do we limit the extension to a small portion of the triennium? Why not simply allow it to be extended, regardless of how many months it is, until the next General Synod? Presumably, the electors in an electoral synod and the candidates all know how old they are going to be at the time of the next General Synod. So this isn't a surprise that that is difficult to deal with. Why not simply say that when the primate's term ends at the General Synod after that primate's 70th birthday? That's a question, so I'm not really sure if it's in order, but it would be worth knowing.
I don't think I can answer that question. It would have to be an amendment.
I don't think I'm brave enough to offer an amendment.
I thank you.
Unless the movers of the motion wish to reconsider, well, I'm going to sit down.
Microphone number 1.
Thank you. Hannah Wagira, Youth Delegate for the Diocese of Calgary. I just have a question. Have we had an interim primate before, especially just from the younger side of the room, don't necessarily know the past many decades? And is this more of a unique situation that we are looking at and wanting to change in the future just in case it happens again? Or is this, something that happens more regularly?
I think that Alan Perry is going to answer you.
My involvement with General Synod only goes back to the beginning of this millennium, so I can't speak off the top of my head for too long, but I do recall that we had an interim primate following the retirement of Archbishop Michael Piers, and if my memory serves correctly, that happened early in 2004, and there was a General Synod a few months later. The acting primate at the time was the Archbishop of Kootenay, Archbishop David Crawley. I can't speak from inside knowledge as to how that worked. He certainly came and chaired the next General Synod meeting, and I don't know how well it worked. It was after the last meeting of COGS, so I didn't have any particular interaction with him. But so it has happened, but for a fairly short period of time.
Thank you.
Now, I understand that David Jones is wanting to speak to this motion. I think I have to give the microphone number 1. Go ahead.
Can I just say that the question that was asked, there were actually 2 questions, and the second question was, would this apply in the future as well? Yes, the amendment would apply on a go-forward basis. It's not just specific to this circumstance.
Microphone number 1.
I suppose my question is, I'm Jonathan Hoskin. I'm from the Diocese of Brandon. I guess my question is related to the role of the primate and the office of the primate, because in other provinces of the Anglican Communion, except for the United States, the primate or the leading bishop is a diocesan bishop, is a metropolitan within that national church. And so I recognize there's things that go along with being primate in the Anglican Church of Canada, but I also recognize that we're not one of the larger Anglican provinces in the communion in the world. Membership, probably not, right? Finances, maybe, because we're a first world nation. My question is, are the responsibilities really too big for a metropolitan to take on for a short period of time? And if so, are we putting too much in the primate's office that should be delegated to diocesan bishops or to provincial synods rather than at the national level? Because apparently other churches in our communion can do it just fine. So I'm just throwing that out there because I've got questions. I don't know the answer to them. And so I'm just asking.
Thank you. Do you want to answer them?
I'd like to answer that, and perhaps it's appropriate then to close the debate and have our vote. The answer is this: the question about whether the primate should be a diocesan bishop or not, or whether you should create a primatial diocese, and so on, has been very thoroughly canvassed over about 120 years. And we've landed where we've landed. In about 2010, there was a very careful report that rejected any change to the model that we have. So the issue is not on the table today.
So now we need to have a vote, and we need to vote. This will be a vote that will be decisive today, but it will be needed to be taken in orders. And so I'm going to ask the order of laity, anyone who is wearing a green lanyard, if they will stand if they are in favor of this.
No, not green. It's not green lanyard. The lanyards aren't color-coded.
What?
Everyone has green lanyards,
I know.
so it's...
No, I'm just saying that if you're not a voting member, please don't vote. But if you are a person who is lay and are in favor of this motion, will you please stand? I think that's what we're doing still, right? Okay. Thank you. This is going to be really tough. Those who are in the order of laity, who are opposed, please stand. Count them. Thank you. I think that's passed.
Clergy.
And now amongst the clergy, those who are in favor. And please make sure if you're towards the back of the group, if you're not a voting member, please find somewhere to sit. It's only reasonable. I think about 36. Please be seated. Now, those amongst you who are voting members and are of the clergy order, please rise if you are opposed. Too close. Okay, well, we've now decided that this is too close. So we're going to ask the honorary secretaries to do the counting, and here's the way it's going to work. They're going to vote now. Only the clergy now are going to vote, and if you are in favor, please stand and be prepared to sit once you've been counted. Don't sit until you've been counted. And I think it's going to be clear when you've been counted. So there are 3 people ready to go, and they have their tables in front of them. And so I'm going to ask you, if you're a clergy person and you are in favor, please stand. Oh, the head table, yes. I don't get to vote. I don't get to vote.
Well, you could actually.
I know. And now I'm going to ask members of the clergy who can vote, if they are opposed, to please stand. Okay, we need to do this also now for the bishops. So all the bishops who are present and voting members, please stand if you are in favor. And now I'm going to ask the bishops who are opposed to please stand. Tell them now so that people understand. So the honorary secretaries are going to bring up the results of those two elections when they've tallied the numbers, and they can give us the raw numbers.
Madam Chair, is it in order to sing a hymn while we wait?
Well, maybe you should just tell me, not take over the chair for a second.
What did he ask?
He asked if we could sing a hymn.
Oh. And what declares it? Twice. But it was clear that there was a majority, even with the people who were.
She's thinking we might need to count votes by orders.
No, it was just overwhelming.
Okay, here she comes.
33 would be 11, so it looks like it's failed.
So I have to report that the motion has failed. Do I have to say that? And it has failed in the order of bishops. I think we're going to move on to the next motion.
Madam Prolocutor, the next motion is A040, which is to set the bands in the steps, the bands in the table that determines the number of delegates, clergy, and lay to General Synod. The proposed motion, or the proposed table, is contained in Appendix 1 of A040 of the report, GWG report. That would be the result of this. The Governance Working Group and COG spent an awful lot of time thinking about whether a number of issues, but whether there should be a reduction in the minimum number of lay and clerical representatives from each diocese. It's currently 2 clergy, 2 lay, 1 youth, and of course the bishops. To make General Synod smaller, you would need to make that minimum 1 and 1, and possibly move the youth member to one of those 2, and so on. After quite a bit of discussion at COGS, COGS decided that only 1 person from a diocese was not the way they wished to go or would recommend to go, that it would be very lonely for people from the smaller dioceses to be with 1 lay and perhaps 1 clergy. And the Governance Working Group and COGS also considered whether they could recommend reducing the size of the order of bishops, restricting, instead of all bishops being members of the order, voting members of the order of bishops, reducing that perhaps to just diocesans, but that would have then forced the question of, well, why do we have the dioceses we have? And why would we not include suffragans, for example, and so on? And at the end of the day, the COGS recommends don't change that, leave all bishops in the order of bishops. It votes as a separate order in all events. And COGS was quite concerned about the lack of diversity in this body, but pointed out that actually we're the recipients of the church coming up from the bottom. We don't determine who comes here. Your dioceses determine that. And so if your dioceses aren't diverse, we're not going to be diverse by definition. So after a great deal of discussion, and to keep General Synod not particularly larger, not particularly smaller, Council General Synod and Governance Working Group recommends changing the bands that are sitting in the Constitution to change the numbers, and it's in the motion to amend paragraph 8F, so that in paragraph 1, 4,999 be changed to 2,500, so that average attendance on the 4 Sundays on the second and third years before General Synod would be changed, which would get the minimum number of 2 and 2 plus 1 would be changed to 2,500. And similarly for paragraph 2, that 5,000 to 999, that band be changed to 2,501 and 7,500. Similarly, the next band be changed, and finally, the band 5,000 be changed to 7,500. So that's the motion to create a new table. And the result of the new table would be to maintain 2 clergy and 2 lay, plus a youth, plus the bishops from every diocese. So that doesn't change what we currently have. What is being changed is when you get additional members, and it would not particularly change the size of General Synod. You can't be certain of that because we don't know what the numbers exactly are, but the expectation is it would be about the size we are, and COGS came to the conclusion that reducing the size of General Synod as our primary and principal discussion and community building vehicle was not something they could recommend. So I so move.
So we're going to begin our discussion with microphone number 1.
Michael Wolf, Diocese of Islands and Inlets, formerly known under its colonial name of Diocese of British Columbia. I've a quick question for clarification, if you wouldn't mind. The last paragraph of the explanatory note seems to be at odds with Appendix I. I realize the explanatory note isn't part of the motion, but it says, it talks about the number of bishops from Toronto now being 3 instead of 5, and the number of bishops from another diocese, excuse me, I forget the name, would now be 3 instead of 2. But of course, in the appendix, that isn't what it says. So is there something wrong with the explanatory note, or I'm just reading it wrong?
No, the table, you only get as many bishops as you got. And so if you only have 3 instead of 5, you get 3. And this is, the table is not amending, the table isn't becoming part of the Constitution. It's those numbers that are becoming part of the Constitution. Those numbers only affect delegates from laity and clergy. But what the table does is to demonstrate the wholeness of it. And so the table doesn't get actually put in anywhere.
No, well, I understand that, except that in the explanatory note, you know, it says refer to Appendix I to see what the result of the amendment will be. And then the explanatory note at the bottom doesn't jibe with what the appendix I says. That's all.
But the explanatory note is not part of the motion.
No, I appreciate that. Neither is Appendix I. And they don't say the same thing. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's why the explanatory note tells you that while there were 5 in the table for when the table was created 2 or 2.5 years ago, things have been changed since then. And that's the explanatory note, is just flagging that difference.
Thank you, Chancellor. The penny just dropped. Thank you.
So, oh, thank you. Microphone 2.
Sorry. Arlene Sams from the Diocese of Western Newfoundland. I just had a question for clarification where it says there is no monetary impact to this motion. However, with 10 more people included, would that not result in monetary impact?
Sure.
So the question on financial implications is for the General Synod budget.
Okay.
In fact, the change for the General Synod wouldn't be material, but there would be an impact for dioceses who cover the cost of accommodation and meals for their delegates. So where a diocese gets more lay and clergy delegates under this formula, they would be bearing that cost.
Thank you for the clarification.
Microphone number 2.
Hi, Vince. I'm with the Anglican Council of Indigenous Peoples.
Just a question for you about whether or not, I just need some clarification. So the bands, like for example, it says one bishop, Rupert's Land. Is that, so in the meantime, Rupert's Land, just in case, I'm not saying that we are, but just so that they elect another bishop, does that mean that we can only send one bishop to the next one?
No, all bishops are members of the order of bishops. This motion does not change that.
Okay.
What the table does is to try and give us an approximation of what would be the size of General Synod if this change happened to the clergy and lay delegates. It doesn't touch the bishops, and it actually doesn't touch the youth members either, and it doesn't touch the officers.
Thank you.
And if I could just elucidate a bit more, in 2013, the size of General Synod was 291 people. In 2016, it was 234. In 2019, it was 249. The best guess of what we have, because we don't yet have statistics, is that it would be 259 using those bands.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So I think we're ready to take a vote on that if there's no other people who have questions, comments, or... So again, we are left with counting by orders. And so I'm going to invite the lay people, again, those who are in favor, to please rise. Thank you very much. Those lay people who are opposed, please rise. There you go. Thank you. Amongst the clergy, those who are in favor, please rise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Please sit. And those who are opposed? Amongst the clergy, those who are opposed. Thank you. Amongst the bishops, those who are in favor, please rise. Please be seated. Those who are opposed amongst the bishops, please rise. Thank you. That motion has carried.
We'll leave the other governance motion for a later time because we want to give the next period of time to hearing from Bishop Anthony Pogo. We're very mindful at this time of Bishop Pogo's visit with us of the tragic civil war in his home country of South Sudan. Since 2013, Bishop Pogo has been an active leader with the Primates and House of Bishops of the Episcopal Church in South Sudan in calling for peace and an end to taking up arms, and to respect the sanctity of human life and all of creation. The current Primate of South Sudan, Archbishop Justin Badi Arama, has reminded the peace partners in government of the need to implement all aspects of the revitalized peace agreement. He invites us all to please pray for peace in South Sudan, as well as an end to the ongoing conflict in Sudan. We will receive a resolution later in this gathering calling for prayer, support, and an end to this tragic conflict there. So we are very grateful to have Anthony with us. He previously served on the Archbishop of Canterbury's staff at Lambeth Palace and on the retirement of Archbishop Josiah Idowu-Firon, Anthony was chosen as the next General Secretary for the Anglican Communion And it's been a great delight to work with him closely on the Standing Committee and on other committees. And so, Anthony, we invite you to come forward and speak to us now.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to address you all today as you gather for this General Synod of the Anglican Church of Canada. I would like to thank Archbishop Linda for the invitation to be here. It's wonderful to have this time of fellowship together. It's been good to meet many new friends, but also people that I've met before in various other fora. I want to commend the importance of these ecumenical relationships with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada and the Anglicans in Canada, which I believe is an example to the whole Anglican communion. I've been privileged to have had the opportunity to visit your province in the past. I remember my most recent visit to Canada very fondly, where I was in Toronto for the regional primates meeting in 2018, ahead of the Lambeth Conference, which was meant to have happened in 2020, but because of COVID was delayed. This is my first visit as Secretary General of the Anglican Communion. Since taking up my role, it has been a priority for me to build upon my current understanding of each province, and I look forward to the fellowship we will be having together this week. The Anglican Church of Canada and its members, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, is one of the 42 autonomous yet interdependent provinces in the Anglican Communion and is a very valued member. We are a communion that spans over 165 countries with an estimated membership of 86 million people, consisting of different languages, cultures, contexts, challenges, and expectations. Of course, we also remember the last Anglican Congress, which met in Toronto in 1963. At that meeting, the whole Anglican Communion committed itself to, I quote, mutual responsibility and interdependence. That high standard is a calling from God that we all should cherish and seek to cultivate. A deep common concern for one another and a concern for our unity of faith and life. It was good to have had your three ACC members, Manny, Anita, and Bishop Riskila, at ACC with us in Ghana in February. I am pleased to see that further members from the Anglican Church in Canada have key roles on various networks and commissions, as Archbishop Linda referred to earlier. I cannot name all of them, but wish to express my gratitude for your faithful service to the communion. I would, however, particularly like to thank Archbishop Linda, who, among other things, is on the Primates Standing Committee. Thank you very much for all that you do for the communion. You are representing the Americas region. Now, the Americas region covers the provinces of Canada, the Episcopal Church, Mexico, the West Indies, Central America, South America, Chile, and Brazil. Thank you for your dedication to the communion. I'd also like to thank Venerable Paul Feli, who has been a key member of the communications team for several Lambeth conferences and ACC meetings, and continues to provide words of wisdom to our comms team. I would like to firstly address where things currently stand in the communion, and then I will speak briefly on the theme of your synod, Let There Be Greening. As you know, the Anglican Communion Office serves and supports the communion and all the 42 provinces equally. We don't see ourselves as the headquarters of the Anglican Communion. We see the ACO serving the 4 instruments of the communion, and their role is to promote the unity and purposes of the churches of the Anglican Communion in mission, evangelism, ecumenical relations, communication, administration, and finance. What we do is that we play a facilitative role rather than one of implementing programs. You could say that the Anglican Communion Office is the grease that oils the instruments, the wheels of the instruments of communion. Let me take the opportunity to thank you as a province for the support financial support that you have given in your provincial contributions to the Anglican Communion budget. The instruments of the communion have indicated readiness to change the structure, for changes in the structures of the communion, something which you may have heard recently. There is a need for this review. Some would like us to maintain the status quo, while others would like the changes to be made outside of the existing structures. My view is that doing nothing is not an option. However, any changes to the current instruments or to our structures should only be undertaken through and within the existing structures of the Anglican Communion, not by any other avenues. As Anglicans, we are people of order, and so we follow and respect our existing structures, including the Constitution of the Anglican Consultative Council. If I may, I would like to share some more details on the proposed initiatives for changes of the structures in the 4 instruments of the communion. Firstly, the Anglican Consultative Council. The Inter-Anglican Standing Commission on Unity, Faith and Order, known as YASCUFO, was asked to explore issues of structure and decision-making in the Anglican Communion as central to our call to be one. The Anglican Consultative Council in Ghana earlier this year approved this initiative, and we will be presenting the initial report early next year. And one of your bishops is a member of YASCUFO, as we heard earlier. Secondly, the Primates meeting. The 2016 Primates meeting requested a task group to maintain conversation among themselves with the invitation of restoration of relationship, the rebuilding of mutual trust, healing the legacy of hurt, recognizing the extent of our commonality, and exploring the deep differences, ensuring that they are held between the primates in the love and grace of God, of Christ. Coming out of that group, the Standing Committee and the primates established a subsequent working group to focus on strengthening of the Standing Committee in order to look at how the different instruments can work better together. This group has met several times and has been updating the Primates and Standing Committee on the progress of their work. And I'm sure that they will continue to do so and give their report at the November meeting of Standing Committee, and also at the planned Primates meeting in April next year. Thirdly, we heard earlier of the Lambeth Conference. At the Lambeth Conference, one of the things that came out of the Lambeth Conference was a Lambeth call on Anglican identity. In phase 3, we are also hoping that there will be also an indication of what needs to be done in terms of a conversation on Anglican identity. On the 4th instrument of the communion, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby himself, said in Ghana recently that he welcomes a review of the role of the Archbishop of Canterbury. He said he has heard the concerns expressed recently around the globe, and believes that changes to his role within the communion would be helpful, as long as they are agreed and are done through the existing instruments. He reiterated that in conversation that I had with him recently. And what he is saying is that this process should be one that should be undertaken indeed within the existing structures of the instruments of the communion. And so as we move forward as a communion, let us also consider our contexts. Let us acknowledge and respect the different contexts of the Anglican Communion. On the issues that we disagree on, it is important that we moderate our language and not be judgmental in our response. Such respect needs to be extended to those who we do not agree with within our own provinces, dioceses, or regions. As we move forward as a communion, let us consider how our context and what we would like the future of the Anglican Communion to be. Through the existing structures, sustainable changes can and should be made. Let me now turn to the importance of safeguarding creation, highlighted by the theme of this synod, let there be greening. We are all acutely aware of the climate crisis and how the integrity of creation is under threat. Despite all the horrifying news, there are many good and encouraging stories from around the communion responding to the environmental crisis and ways people are living out the Anglican Communion's fifth mark of mission, which is strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. To name just a few, Anglican churches are engaged in forestation initiatives to help mitigate climate change in some places, such as Kenya and the Philippines, and defending forests in other places, such as Brazil and the Solomon Islands. Across the whole of the Anglican Communion, churches are engaged in building resilience to disasters and are often amongst the first responders whenever disasters hit. As the church, let's continue to be the change that we want to see. I recently signed the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty on behalf of the Anglican Consultative Council, joining with other faith leaders to call for a global treaty to phase out fossil fuels and support a just transition powered by clean energy and a sustainable future for all. This was a resolution approved by members of ACC 18, but I would like to encourage Anglican primates and bishops to also add their signature on behalf of the churches and dioceses of the communion and urge that governments do what they can to halt new gas and oil exploration. In your own province, it is commendable that the Church of Canada is leading on net zero carbon churches. The Primate's World Relief and Development Fund is doing extraordinary work on a range of disaster responses and on issues of indigenous peoples and protection of the environment. I am deeply grateful that they were a founding member of the Anglican Alliance and have supported its work consistently over the past 12 years. Thank you to all of you who support generously the work of the Primate's World Relief and Development Fund. I also understand that some of your dioceses have already been taking forward the Communion Forest Initiative that was launched at the Lambeth Conference last year as one of the legacies of the conference. The aim of the Communion Forest Initiative is to significantly invest in tree planting and ecosystem conservation, protection and restoration activities around the world. These efforts mark a practical, spiritual, and symbolic response to the climate crisis. I want to applaud your wisdom on the use of land and creation as a gift and the way your province has embraced the Lambeth call on the environment and sustainable development. Another thing that came out of the Lambeth conference was the need to review or revive companion links between dioceses. At the Lambeth conference, 178 bishops expressed interest in establishing companion relationships with other dioceses. I hope that dioceses and bishops in this province without such links would take that forward, and I would be very pleased if you indicate your willingness to my office to do so. We are all mindful of the importance of safeguarding of all people in the work we do and the way we work. I know that Canada is looking at incorporating a trauma-informed approach to its work on safeguarding. This is encouraging. We have been concerned by the wildfires that have been spreading across the length of your country. I'm aware that in total, an area 5 times larger than the Greater Toronto area has been burned. This has an impact on air quality and on the lives, livelihoods, and safety of people living in the affected areas. Be assured of our continued prayers for these fires to cease. I'm reminded of Luke chapter 4, verse 18 to 20, where we read, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." My sincere hope and prayer is that the Anglican Church in Canada continues to follow this call to proclaim the good news in meeting the physical and spiritual needs of the people. May you be a light unto others through your work to tackle climate change, disaster response, to promote the rights of indigenous communities, as well as all other commendable work that you do as a church. Before I conclude, I would like to refer to a matter that will be discussed at this synod. While it is not my role to influence your debate and voting, I do want to indeed highlight the draft resolution calling for peace in Sudan. As I have said, each of the 42 provinces of the Anglican Communion are interdependent and autonomous, but they are also interdependent. This draft resolution is an example of one province offering support and solidarity with another. Archbishop Linda, I know that you know Archbishop Ezekiel. You meet at Primate's meetings. Your ACC members know the Episcopal Church of Sudan ACC members. They meet at plenary sessions. It is this, the interconnectedness across continents, cultures, and languages, which is the strength of our Anglican communion. In my recent communication with Archbishop Ezekiel, he asked for prayers for peace in Sudan, and I do hope that this synod will do exactly that. Thank you once again for the opportunity to speak to you today. I look forward to working with you and supporting you in ways that I can during my time as Secretary General of the Anglican Communion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony, for that passionate defense of the Anglican Communion and the work that's going on in review and change, as well as the reminder of our interdependence one with another. We're now at 3 o'clock, in which we have a break until 3:45. There's coffee and tea out in the lobby, and we'll gather here at 3:45 and continue with our governance questions. Thank you.
Somebody else was overcome from Athabasca.
Well, welcome back, and I invite you to take your seats. Just want to remind the members of the Anglican Council of Indigenous Peoples that there is a space set apart for the Indigenous members of the General Synod to gather. It is the Council Chambers room, which is on the main level down at the far end of all of those fast food places on the main floor, one up from this floor. And it is open every day from 8 a.m. till 11 p.m. If you wish to gather there, if you want to gather for prayer or ceremony, or if you just need a space to sit. But we are asked to remind you that it is open and there's no security, so please do not leave anything in that room. If you leave the room, please take all your belongings with you when you leave. We come now to the ministries of General Synod, a series of videos that will be shown throughout the General Synod that give you a sense of what the different parts of the work of General Synod are, and we have the first of those videos.
Many years ago, I did the Ignatian spiritual exercises, which is 30 days of silence, where you pray with the life of Christ through the scriptures. And there's a part of that where Ignatius talks about holding things with indifference. Now, he doesn't mean an indifference that doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you hold it lightly, whatever it is that's been given to you in this moment. And you hold it lightly, so that if it's taken away, it doesn't change your joy, it doesn't change your rootedness in God, it doesn't change anything else. It was a gift while you had it, and then you release it. There have been changes over history, over and over and over again. And our small piece of it needs to be ready to break open for something new. The heart of the Primate's work is listening to the whole church, from coast to coast to coast, listening to the heartbeat of what dioceses and parishes are doing, and constantly being encouraged, surprised, delighted to see the ways in which they are living out the mission of God where they are. The Primate gets to travel, to visit, to listen, to learn the stories, and then to take those stories to someone else and share them, or to say, have you shared what you're doing? Because the rest of the church would love to hear it. Well, the way forward, I think, for the Primate is to do some of that big picture describing. What do I see? Many people are rooted in what they see in their particular spot, which might be great, but it might be devastatingly painful. And they simply cannot see that there's more. There's something else, there's something bigger, there's a bigger picture. And so if I can both acknowledge the pain, but also show a bigger picture over time and over space, and over the whole of our Anglican communion. I mean, that's certainly what I've come back from this recent trip to Africa with, is a deeper appreciation for the breadth of the communion. And the things that we're upset about that are declining are things that Africa is experiencing. So to worship at a cathedral that's just has 11 services going on during the day, some of them simultaneously, and thousands of children. I mean, my heart just kind of stopped as I looked at all of this activity and energy and passion and bubbling up. God is at work. We can be encouraged and enlivened by what we hear from other places. So if I can bring those stories back, and then to paint a picture of faithfulness in the midst of struggle, and faithfulness that can rejoice in where others are growing and thriving, and faithfulness that can say, okay, God, I'm open to something new. Show me what you want us to see.
We move now to the no debate list and the introduction of it. I turn that over to Susan Bell, the chair of the Resolutions Committee.
Archbishop, Mr. Chancellor, and members of Synod, on behalf of the Resolutions Committee, I respectfully submit the proposed no debate list. You'll notice that it is divided into two according to the procedure for adoption. Now, just a gentle reminder to Synod that the no debate list is just that. Resolutions that in the consideration of the Resolutions Committee seem to require no debate. This does not imply that any of these resolutions has any less importance than those that are not on the no debate list. It's a procedural action which allows the business of Synod to be efficient with legislative time. We recognize and appreciate all of the work and effort which has produced each and every one of these resolutions. And now I believe the Chancellor will explain the procedure for the no debate list.
Thank you. So the no debate list, the content of it has just been posted. If nobody does anything, then we will have a vote tomorrow, an omnibus vote to pass those motions. So it'll just be one without any debate. But the new rules of order and procedure provide that any member of General Synod may require that a resolution be removed from the no debate list, and there are three ways to do that. A, by giving written notice to the Resolutions Committee stating that the member will speak against the resolution. B, providing notice of motion in writing and duly seconded to amend the resolution. And C, providing written notice to the Resolution Committee that the member requires clarification of the resolution. So those are the three ways that one of the elements, one of the proposed motions would be taken off the no debate list and would come to the floor for a debate, if that was the will of members.
So this is just the announcement of the introduction of the no debate list. It is posted on the docket now. You can see which resolutions have been listed in the no debate list. And if you wish to remove any one of them, you must give it in writing. And Susan, is that by email?
Yes, please.
By email to bishop@niagara.anglican.ca. No dot between the Niagara and the Anglican. Okay. Sorry. And the deadline is, sorry.
24 hours from now.
24 hours from now. So by 3:50 p.m. tomorrow. Microphone 2, is there a question? Yep.
At my table, we are having a hard time finding the no debate list on the website. Where exactly should we be looking?
Question?
I'm sorry, finding which?
The no debate list, where is it?
Oh,
Is it on the docket?
It should be in an email that has just been sent to you.
My apologies, it's an email that has just been sent to all delegates. Is it not also in the door?
On the door as well.
And it's also posted on the door, by the door.
It's also posted on the door.
Over by the door.
It will be on the website in about 30 seconds. Thank you. And emailed in the next 5 minutes. So if you can just, we'll move the deadline to 3:55.
Oh, make it an even 4 o'clock.
An even 4 o'clock, okay. By 4 p.m. tomorrow, if you would indicate if any of the motions need to be removed from the docket. Thank you. We move now to the report from the Dismantling Racism Task Force that I spoke about this morning in my comments that was created at the beginning of our quadrennium. I invite Brittany Hudson, who's a member of that task force, to make a presentation to us prior to us considering motions the task force is recommending.
Hello, I am not Brittany Hudson. But they will be up here momentarily. I'll also say the no debate list will be posted in 5 minutes when I get down from this stage and get to the doors, on the doors there. It is my great pleasure to introduce Brittany and the work of the Dismantling Racism Task Force, which has been a real joy of my ministry for the last 3 years. And actually, Brittany and I have been working together for the last 3 years, but today was the first day that we met in person, which is a joyous occasion. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Brittany, who will tell you more about the work of that task force. Brittany is an Afro and Indo-Caribbean community developer with over 10 years of experience in program design, content creation, and community-based facilitation. Presently, they are pursuing a master's in theological studies and community development at the University of Toronto, where they're focusing on faith formation for Black queer individuals. Brittany is passionate about creating equitable environments for BIPOC, 2S, LGBTQI+, and people living with disabilities. Their work is grounded by the experiences and knowledge shared by Black people across the diaspora, especially on topics such as queer liberation and Indigenous spiritualities. Throughout the years, Brittany has worked within various sectors, focusing on disability justice, faith formation, decolonization, and reconciliation. When they are not working, Brittany enjoys exploring the outdoors, playing basketball, and cultivating queer joy. And it is my joy to welcome Brittany, and I hope you will join me.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. It's an honor. As Ryan said, it's true. This is our first time actually seeing each other, and we're not on a screen. And I'm sure there's faces that I'm seeing here that I recognize, but on a smaller screen. So it's really lovely to be here in person with you all. Before I move forward. Okay, so I am one of the members of the task force on dismantling racism. I was appointed to the task force through the Black Anglicans of Canada as a representative. I'd like to say before I go delve deeper into the report and our process that the calls that are mentioned in the report aren't anything new. They're calls that they're echoes from folks who have been doing this work, folks who are living and present and actively working to create a safer and more inclusive church. And they're calls that have been made from folks who are not with us anymore, folks who I see as liberators and as ancestors who have done this work. So what we're talking about today is not something that is new. We didn't come up with these ideas. They're not our original thoughts. We are, and I say we as I imagine that my colleagues are watching, but what we're doing here today is really just speaking to what has been said, what we've heard, what we witnessed, and yes, I just wanted to name that before we begin. So as I mentioned, I am not the only task force member of this committee. So the folks who are on this committee was Marlena Anderson from the Territories of People, the Reverend Vivian Lamb from the Diocese of New Westminster, Pat Lavelle from ELCIC, and Irene Moore Davis from the Diocese of Huron. Something I'd like to mention, because at our first meeting we were trying to figure out how are we going to build our structure on this, and we thought we would take a different approach. We didn't have a chair on our committee. This was something that many people asked us about often. We decided to do a process where we all shared the leadership. So we worked very collaborative. There was a non-hierarchical approach, which we thought that was a posture that was really important in order for us to even do this work, because we're doing something that is new. We're calling for change within our structure, so we decided to do that as well. I'd just like to point that out. Before I even go further, I'd like to thank Ryan, because Ryan was very instrumental in keeping us on track. As a staff person appointed to support with that committee, Ryan was like one of the greatest allies. When I think of a white ally, I think of Ryan in many ways. So thank you so much, Ryan, for being a part of that. I'd also like to thank the Reverend Neil Elliott, who supported us with the development of our survey, which I'll talk about further later on. And I'd like to thank the Black, Indigenous, and people of color who made this moment possible. As I mentioned before, this work is not new. There are folks in this room who have been championing this cause, and there's folks even outside of these walls. There are many folks that we spoke with, many folks who are no longer with us, who champion this, and I'd like to thank them for their work, because without them, none of this would be possible. So just really grateful for that. Okay, so let's give you a little bit of background about this project or the committee. So everyone should know we were established through the Council of General Synod in June 2020, and our goal was to look at this idea of dismantling racism within the church. So the task force was established by the resolution of the council, and we were challenged to look through a couple stages, the next stages of this work within the church. We had nominations that were sought from bishops, from members of COGS, and from leadership of the Anglican Council of Indigenous Peoples, and members were appointed and met regularly over the last 3 years, which I can't believe it's been that long. 3 years we worked in discerning what the direction would be together. We met regularly via Zoom, which is awesome. And we also had an interim report that went out to COGS, and COGS gave us feedback on that report. We really wanted to go deeper, because we didn't want to just be a group of folks in a room just talking to each other and saying, what do we think? Because everyone could have an idea. But we wanted to delve deeper, and really wanted to hear from community. So one of the ways we did that was through the survey. So with the help of Reverend Neil Elliott, we were able to create a survey that went out to every diocese, 30 dioceses. We got 12 responses from that survey, and that survey had 3 key areas. So first was representation. We wanted to figure out the extent to which those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color were represented in the church. Something we noted in that section of it was that there was a lack of race-based data on clergy, lay members, and general membership. We also wanted to delve into policies, so the extent to which anti-racist policies were being implemented in the church. And we found that respondents were unaware or unfamiliar with the Charter of Racial Justice. That was a consistent theme. And the third key area was on anti-racism training. And what I'll highlight from that piece, you'll delve deeper into that survey and find the responses. But within that, there was disparities regarding what trainings were mandatory, within particular dioceses and what trainings were available, and then what trainings were optional. So that's what the survey was looking at. The survey was looking at representation, looking at policies, and it was looking at trainings. Those are just the starting pieces to like the basics for dismantling racism. So we delved into that. And as I said, we had 12 responses from the 30 dioceses. The other piece that we were looking at as well, so we did the survey, we also wanted to speak with folks that are doing the work, folks that are creating community across, from coast to coast to coast. So as best as we could, we consulted with stakeholders, with community groups that were BIPOC, and we shared with them a list of our recommendations, things that we'd come across, and we asked them, honestly, is this good enough? and they answered us. They provided us feedback. We worked with them. We teared things apart. We put them back together. And what I'll note is while we did our best to communicate with folks as best as possible, there's limitations to that. One limitation is that a lot of the groups that are creating community across the country are not necessarily official groups within the church, so that could be hard to locate. And the other limitation that we found, actually I think that's like the main limitation. It's kind of hard to locate folks if they're not necessarily established. And it's also hard to find time for folks that maybe they're maybe doing this work on a volunteer basis as well. And we'll get into that a bit in our motions, in our recommendation. But we met with these folks, and so the report the motions that we're giving you and the recommendations, that comes from those stakeholders as well. These are things that they believe in as well. Okay, so we have 3 motions. The first motion is continuing the work of dismantling racism within the church. So the first piece is to establish a permanent national advisory council on dismantling racism. So we were called to be a task force that was looking at that for about 3 years. And while we did the best that we could, racism has deep roots within our country, within our world, and it's not going to take a volunteer group of a couple folks that's going to just pull out all those roots and start afresh. So it's vital that if we're going to be doing this work and we want this work to actually have deep roots within our church, that we need to have an advisory that is doing this work. The other piece that I'll mention when thinking of this advisory is also establishing or looking at the possibility of having a full-time position for someone that is looking at solely anti-racism within this church. One thing that came across within our committee was that we were all volunteer, and while we're all experts within our various focuses, and while we were committed to it, it is a burden, and it is extra work that comes on our backs. And that's a consistent theme for racialized folks. We tend to have to fight and to push things forward on a volunteer basis, and that creates extra burden for us. So it's really vital if we want this work to be successful and we want to actually create change within our church, that we pay someone to do this. We pay someone that's focusing on this, that is really that is looking at our structures, that is actively doing programming and support across the country. So those are 2 pieces. Having the established, and if we want to continue it, we need to have an established committee that is solely looking at that. And the other piece is having a full-time position. The other addition to continuing the work is a national action plan that would basically create the structure of how we go forward. What are we agreeing on necessarily to get this done? If we want to continue this work, what does 5 years down the road look like? What does 2 years down the road look like? And then also continuing the review of our church structures, culture, policies, and practices. A lot of that can be embedded into the advisory and into that full-time position. And then to ensure that to ensure that the advisory actually is reflective of our communities, we need to make sure that there's representation from the communities that are most impacted. So the communities that are most impacted are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. In particular, Black and Indigenous people are overly impacted by racism. So ensuring that it has that representation with the demographics, but also a national reach. So I'll name this within our committee. One of the limitations was that while we tried our best to have national reach, it can be difficult because there are voices that are just not heard. There are voices that have been pushed out of our church for various reasons or don't feel comfortable coming to the table and having a conversation. So if an advisory was to start, it could really start laying that groundwork for making sure that this is a national conversation, not just a conversation in Ontario or a conversation in Alberta, but this is a conversation that is happening across the country. So that is the first motion. The third motion is dismantling racism and faith formation. So in order for this to be done, we're encouraging the engagement with seminaries and theological programs to develop a process or framework that supports the development of anti-racism curriculum in theological education. And this is vital. This is vital because if our leaders aren't having that formation, then how can we lead our churches? How can we lead our parishes into ways that are life-giving and supportive? As a seminarian, I've spent lots of time with my students, with students that are my colleagues and people who've been through seminary before, and it's not always a pleasant experience for folks who are racialized within those walls. There's a lot of deconstructing that needs to be done there. So it's vital that if we're going to be actually doing this work, that we're making sure that our leaders are equipped to be safe places, that they're equipped to lead folks in ways that are diverse, lead folks in ways that are anti-racist. These are principles that need to be embedded into our structure from just a people standpoint, but also from faith formation. Like, what gets valued within our spaces? What music is valued? What teachings are valued? Who gets to speak? What's our preaching style? And how do we actually delve into the word? These are things that they might seem minuscule, but they're vital because we need to be able to see ourselves. Everyone should be able to see themselves within the scripture, within our liturgies. So this is just a starting point. If we start from the folks that we're training to be leaders, then we're creating the environment that when we get into our local parishes, that there's a foundation there. There's a foundation for how we lead. So that's for faith formation. The other piece of faith formation, so I talked about the theological education and the curriculum piece, but also ensuring that resources are available broadly in all its contexts. So we tend to spend a lot of time talking about seminaries, but the first place that we're usually taught about Jesus is in our Sunday schools. So ensuring that that's also a place where youth and children and their educators are well equipped to create an environment within our churches, within our local parishes that are inclusive, spaces where Black and brown kids can see themselves within pictures. That's a very small ask, or within the way that we tell our stories, or in what we celebrate throughout the years. And also providing resources that are broadly available for lay training as well. The third recommendation is a commitment to the call to action 59. And that call to action calls on the church parties to the settlement agreement to develop ongoing education strategies to ensure that their respective congregations learn about their church's role in colonization, the history and legacy of residential schools, and why apologies to former residential school students, their families, and communities are necessary. Our task force also calls us to go deeper. That's one piece of our church's legacy. Our church, we can go deeper in examining those roots and naming all of the wrongs that our church has done. Our church has a deep history of being a part of the transatlantic slave trade. We need to name those things and name how we've kept certain groups out because of the basis of the color of their skin and going on. So going deeper into that call and taking that and applying it to all the other injustices that our church has unfortunately been a part of. Because when we acknowledge the past, that's when we're really able to move forward. We can't move forward if we don't name what was done. So that's a vital recommendation. So the next steps, let me make sure perfect. The next steps, I'll mention that there are 3 motions that we're bringing across, but from our consultations, from the surveying, from our time spent for 3 years, there was a lot more recommendations. So there are more recommendations listed in the report, and there's likely much more that are unknown to us. But with more communication across the church, especially with voices and communities who have been systemically silenced within our church, new recommendations can come forth. This is an ongoing work. It's an ongoing work. It's a work that is not going to happen within just a 3-year time span. It's not going to just happen within an academic space or just within a community space. It's a work that has to happen everywhere. So it's really vital that we continue listening. This isn't the final act. I'm sure there's so much more. There are so many voices that we didn't hear from. And there's so many communities that haven't been brought to the table. So having consultations with other Black, Indigenous, and people of color is vital. Having anti-racism education for committees and councils, an anti-racism grant is how do you get this work done if you don't got the funds? And then walking with the self-determining Indigenous church. It's crucial. Some more of the recommendations is updating the Charter for Racial Justice. That charter could use some retwigging. And then having additional data gathered. So we did our initial survey, and I shared the response rate from, it's not even half. Having another survey that goes deeper, that has that push, maybe it's a mandatory survey, it would be helpful. And I'll name it that one of the pieces of the survey that was unfortunate is that we don't, I think I named this before, but we don't collect race-based data. And that survey brought that to light. So having that survey which says who's in the room, who's not, can give us the tools so we can ask that question, why? Why are they not there? Why are they not coming? So surveying is just one place that gives us the foundation so we can start asking those questions. And then also that's surveying the diocese, but also surveying folks of color that are within our walls. What is your experience? What do you need? And letting those voices lead the charge. So having multiple avenues, having those consultations, those conversations, and also having surveying is really vital if you want to hear from a variety of voices. Okay, so I'll just read this. In particular, we continue to hold fast to the belief that to be successful, this work of dismantling racism must be infused with the Holy Spirit's guidance and gift of courage for holy tasks. Without God, this work is not possible. There's a lot of places that are trying to do meaningful anti-racist work, but truly if we're walking in the footsteps of Christ, if we're really being led by Christ, that's when we're gonna get it done right. So our church could be the place where we get it right, where people can see the love of Jesus and see the diversity that is within our walls and how it's valued and cherished. But we can only do that with the Holy Spirit. And the last thing I'll read is the prize at the end is a church where all feel welcomed and affirmed of their rightful place in it and are able to offer their unique God-given perspectives and gifts toward this journey of following Christ faithfully together. So with that, I will leave you to discuss. Thank you for listening and for considering the motions.
As Brittany has said, there are 3 motions that have been brought by the Dismantling Racism Task Force. They are available on the docket. The first one is A200, continuing the work of dismantling racism in the church. Moved by Bishop Priscilla Shaw and seconded by Bishop Jeffrey Woodcroft. Be it resolved that this General Synod direct the Council of General Synod to establish a permanent National Advisory Council on Dismantling Racism, to conduct an initial and ongoing review of church structures, culture, policies, and practices pertaining to racism and anti-racism, develop and implement a national action plan to move from promoting diversity to living out full inclusion, equity, and belonging at all levels of the church in both membership and leadership. Direct the Council of General Synod to ensure that the membership for this advisory council reflects the communities of the church most impacted by racism, namely Indigenous persons, Black persons, and persons of color, and those with experience in anti-racism ministry and leadership, while striving for balanced geographic, gender, ethnocultural, lay, and clergy representation to the degree reasonably possible, and delineating appropriate supportive roles for white settler allies on the Council. And thirdly, to request the Council of General Synod to explore the creation of a full-time staff position at the national level to animate national and diocesan anti-racism activity. The floor is open for any questions or discussion. Microphone 1.
Jesse Zink, Diocese of Montreal. I'd like to speak, first of all, a word of thanks to this committee for their work, and also a word of thanks to the Primate for making it such a priority from the beginning of your term in office. I'd like to speak in support of these resolutions. I'll speak only to this resolution, but I'll vote for all of them. What I want to point out, though, to the Synod, and what I want to draw the Synod's attention to, is a couple of things. First of all, I believe that if we're going to be an anti-racist church, the church leadership needs to reflect the diversity of the membership of this country. And I've noticed, particularly in other provinces of the Anglican Communion, and I'm thinking here specifically of the Church of England and the Episcopal Church, our neighbors to the south, that in about the last 5 to 8 years, the House of Bishops in both of those churches has really taken great steps towards diversifying. And in fact, some of the diversity in those houses of bishops is quite remarkable. And I think there are lessons there to learn, especially when I look at the House of Bishops of the Anglican Church of Canada. And so if this resolution is approved and this work goes forward, I would encourage the people involved in it to learn from our neighbors in the Anglican Communion about how we can begin to take steps to work towards diversifying our leadership. And I think one thing we can do in relation to that is collect better data, as we've already heard. And so we've heard about work that's been done to collect data already, and I really want to commend the committee on that. But I would like to see much better data about the composition of the leadership of our church and the demographic characteristics thereof, because I think it's that data which will allow us to evolve strategies that will help us diversify our leadership. The other thing I want to say is that many of us in this room may be aware of something called the Lund Principle from a meeting in 1952, an ecumenical principle that calls on churches to act together in all matters, except those in which deep differences of conviction compel them to act separately. I was pleased to see on the membership roster of the committee that there was a member from the ELCIC, but I am also, I must say, grieved to know that in this same period in which this committee has been at work, the ELCIC has had a separate committee also working on very similar issues. And that here we are in Calgary together, and yet we are speaking about this issue separately. I don't believe, and I think to the sermon that we heard last night, that this is an issue where we need to lead with our Anglican identity. I think it's an issue where we need to lead with our Christian identity. And so as this work goes forward, I would hope and pray that it could be done at least with our full communion partners. And that brings me to the final thing that I want to say. I work in theological education. I just came back 2 weeks ago from a really terrific gathering on anti-racism and theological education held by the United Church of Canada. It was superb. This work is happening out there. We can learn from it. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. And if we do this work in an ecumenical fashion, I hope and pray we will be even more successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I must apologize, I did not give an opportunity for the mover and the seconder to speak. So I'll ask Bishop Priscilla if you'd like to speak first.
Thanks very much. I'm speaking for the mover and seconder. And I'd like to start by offering sincere thanks to Dr. Ryan Weston and Britt and the members of the Dismantling Racism Task Force for their committed and careful work in moving our church forward in this important work. This resolution calls us to ensure that this work continues on through the life of the church nationally, which will serve to witness beyond the walls of our church as well into the public square. It is important to continue to draw in a rich diversity of experiences and voices. This is the call for a permanent advisory body that commits to reflecting that diversity and allowing it to inform and shape our work going forward. I already look forward to the work that will come out of this new group to bring us further along in this journey together. This work needs your support. It needs support, strategy, and planning. And this motion helps point the way to achieving that. There's much work to be done. Yet, with the foundation of the Dismantling Racism Task Force and the recommendations contained within this resolution, I have faith that with Jesus of Palestine as our guide in this work, we are continuing to get closer to realizing our shared dream of dismantling racism and oppression, upholding the dignity of all people, and building the reign of God on earth. Thank you.
Thank you to the mover and seconder. Microphone 2.
My name is Philip Durr from the Diocese of Toronto. I'm so glad the previous speaker mentioned about the resources out there. And I was blessed that I was able to be appointed by the National Church as part of the Forum of Intercultural Leadership and Learning. That past March, I got invited to the conference about interculturalism, where I learned we moved from multiculturalism, that we talk about that in 80s and 90s, to cross-cultural, that we learned to go and meet someone who is different from you, into today's language, into interculturalism, which means that we integrate different cultures in ministry. And that forum really helped me in we're using appreciative inquiry technique that very positively, even humorously, to share about our experiences of racism, doesn't matter from people of color or indigenous or those who are black experience in the past in Canada. But that conference also gave me hope because 2 years ago I was part of the anti-bias, anti-racism committee in the Diocese of Toronto. And for 11 months, it was very difficult for many of our members because that experience was very negative, a lot of blaming, a lot of shaming, putting people down, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. However, this one, interculturalism, encouraged us that just like Paul wrote in Galatians 3, there's no longer Jew or Greek, there's no longer slave or free, there's no longer male or female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. We acknowledge that there are differences, there are ethnic differences among us, but we also, at the same time, we acknowledge there are gifts, talents from different cultures that we can integrate together to serve the greater church and to the society. And I'm so glad that some of our members from Lutheran also attended that conference, will join us later of this conference. And we try to share that experience of that interculturalism. That is something that we should consider to move forward. So I'd just like to share that with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Any other speakers before we close debate? Microphone 1 and then microphone 2.
Michael Wolf from the Diocese of Islands and Inlets. And I don't like to be the person that asks this question, but I have to because I appreciate processes. At the bottom of the motion, it says that the motion does contain within it financial implications, yes. And then it says, if yes, has the General Synod Expenditures Committee considered the implications? And it doesn't say yes or no. I think if we're going to ask those questions, we should at least get the answers before we vote.
Yes, the Expenditures Committee has met since that was published, and Bishop Andrew Aspel, I think, will respond.
It's not.
Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew Klinker. My apologies. I just elevated you.
Yes, as indicated, my name is Andrew Klinkard. I'm a lay delegate from Niagara, and I am on the Financial Expenditures Committee. And actually, as of sort of mid-morning, I became chair of that committee. So the Expenditures Committee met this morning, and it is our opinion that there are no financial implications at this time. And as the resolution states, it will be up to COGS to consider at a later date as to if they wish to create a continuing staff position.
Thank you. Microphone 2.
Stephen Fields, Toronto. As one who has been in the trenches for 30 years, working for the full inclusion of Black people in the church, I want to support this motion and the report. It is a good report, and I want to thank those who worked to produce it. At the outset, let it be noted that for 30 years or so, we have been discussing these matters, and I remind this body of the 1992 report from Romney Mosley that contained much of what we have heard this evening and we read in the report. I want to submit the report falls short in one regard. Following the lynching of George Floyd, our bishops acknowledged the church's complicity in racism and called it a sin. They said they were sorry and pledged to work at repairing the wrong. The report just presented is the start of that work. Elton John once crooned, "Sorry seems to be the hardest words, but it was easy for the church, and I'm thankful." When the person who caused the harm says, "I'm sorry," that usually lifts the guilt of the one who offended, but it doesn't begin to heal the deep pain the offense may have caused. That's why just saying "I'm sorry" isn't enough. More than sorry is required. Here's where the report falls short in my view. The report speaks today about making wrong things, marking the wrong, but there's more. There is yet to be an apology offered by our church for the pain and grief meted out to Black people in this church, our church. Doors have been closed in our faces, literally and figuratively. And I submit a 10th recommendation that should be considered: the offer and of an apology to the Black community of our church. People still hurt because of this traumatic experience. Many have chosen to have no further part in our community. Many have remained, but have opted to disengage themselves from the system so as to engage with God, who truly loves them. Surely an apology is not enough. Furthermore, it becomes meaningless when those who have been hurt or offended have to ask for it. Apologizing can be hard because it takes humility and vulnerability. We should not have to ask for an apology. Sorry is followed by an apology.
You have about 10 seconds.
Which is followed by reparations. Let me say that we should not be surprised that this is yet to come. I would like the Synod to direct the appropriate group or committee to put in place a framework which will make it possible for our church to do the right thing and make an apology. I leave by quoting my mentor, who was also a mentor of Mosley. He has said that black people are the only people whose claim to humanity has not yet been universally recognized. I thank you.
Thank you. I should have clarified at the beginning that each speaker has 3 minutes. We do normally have a timer. It was meant to be showing on the screen so that the speaker would know it was coming up, and we're having some technical difficulties. So these things become useful at times. And I will just give a brief warning as you're approaching the end of the 3 minutes and ask you to wrap up as you come to the end. And I apologize because these are important topics, but we want to be fair to every speaker. So thank you for honoring that, Stephen. Thank you. Microphone 1.
Roshni Jayawadana from the Diocese of Toronto. Although I am not as experienced as many of the people here, I believe that I have done a lot for this church to the best of my ability to pursue what I believe God is calling me to pursue my vocation, to be heard, and to be a leader in the church, not just as a woman, but a woman of color. And in the midst of that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I have thought about how I present myself. Am I showing a bit too much of my color? Am I showing a bit too much of my culture? Am I showing a bit too much of me? I have been lucky in the Diocese of Toronto that I have seen so much diversity, seen so many examples of it. I've been lucky that I have been given opportunities, but often when this happens, I do ask myself, why am I asked? Am I asked because I'm young? Am I asked because I'm a person of color? Am I asked because I'm a woman? Or am I asked because I'm just Roshni, a child of God? I'm voting for this motion and for these motions because in these motions, I see the church take a moment to stop asking for something of me and instead ask how they can meaningfully support me and care for me and love me and others like me. And I pray that you do.
Thank you. Microphone 2.
Thank you. Ben Solomon, Anglican Council of Indigenous Peoples. Once again, you have put us all, Indigenous people, into the same category as other peoples. We are one of the founding members, founding nations of this country. And I think it's time that organizations, such as the Anglican Church, stop doing that. We are not just another persons of color. So take out the Indigenous component from this and put a new one in where we are, because we have different issues. The issues of Black people are not our issues as well, although the racism part is, and I'm very glad that this is going on and that this is happening. This is great, it's wonderful. But leave us alone to do our own work, to do our own thing. Thank you.
Vince, are you asking for an amendment to this motion to remove the term Indigenous peoples? Is there a seconder for that motion? There's a seconder over here. Can you come and speak and give your name and diocese just for the record?
My name is Dorothy Patterson, and the Diocese of Huron is where I live and love.
We need the amendment in writing. Vince, we'll need it. Like now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I realize it's a simple amendment to remove the terms, but please write it down. We now move to discussing the amendment, which was the removal of the term Indigenous peoples from the motion, and then, depending on the outcome of that, we return to the motion. Is there any discussion of that?
Quick point of order. Do we need to ask the mover and seconder of the original motion if that is a friendly amendment?
No.
No.
Okay.
There's no such thing as a friendly amendment.
I'm not seeing anybody coming to the microphones. I'm therefore going to put the question, all in favor of the amendment to remove the term Indigenous peoples from paragraph, section 2 of motion A200. All in favor, please indicate. Either stand or raise your hand.
Well, I think we need statistical information too. It's not to say that, it's
That
not
was
to
the
say
timer.
that we disregard Indigenous stuff, it's just to say that on this particular thing we partner.
Any opposed, please indicate by standing or raising your hand. That motion is carried? That motion is carried. So we return to the original motion with the removal of Indigenous persons from section 2. Yes, microphone 1.
Hello, my name is Ken Breen from the Diocese of Fredericton. Going back to the motion we were on, I'm generally supportive of the three motions, but I do have two concerns. One is the motion refers to a permanent committee of some sort. And the concern I have about making it permanent is it doesn't put an end point to the issue. And my second concern, and more of a suggestion, would be in the work that the task force will do, or the committee will do, is to put in some metrics to show progress towards dismantling anti-racism, so that there's a target towards, achieving some endpoint or some success. So I'm not voting against the motion, but I do suggest that the work try to have some endpoint and some metrics towards measuring progress towards those ends.
I think those will be taken under advisement by the, if this passes, by the advisory committee. The mover?
Thank you very much. That was a long walk up to the microphone. I would just like to propose that we put this on the table and have an opportunity for the Indigenous people at General Synod to have a consultation about this.
Needs to be seconded.
Is there a seconder to table this pending consultation? There's a seconder, I think it was Sister Heather? Sorry, it's not tabled, it's postponed,
Thank you.
and that needs to be voted on, right?
Certain time or to postpone it indefinitely.
So you need to say, is it being postponed to a certain time, as in within this General Synod, or postponing it indefinitely?
Thank you. I would like to propose that it be postponed until another time in this General Synod. I believe it should be dealt with at this time, but I also want to have an opportunity for consultation.
Okay, the motion that is being postponed is the one without the term Indigenous persons in it, because we voted on No, we haven't voted on the whole motion, though, have we? No, sorry. Okay, get my procedures right here. Thank you. We've had it moved and seconded that the motion be postponed to a time within this General Synod to allow for consultation with the Indigenous community present. Any discussion?
There's no debate.
It's no debate, sorry. All those in favor, please indicate. Those opposed? Thank you, it's carried. We will find a time to return to this, but I would ask if the Indigenous community would indicate to us when they are going to be able to be ready to consider this. We move to the next motion, which is A201, Dismantling Racism and Faith Formation. It is moved by the Reverend Claudette Taylor and seconded by the Most Reverend Lynn McNaughton. And Claudette, would you like to come forward and speak to the motion?
Thank you very much.
Claudette, could you give your name and diocese, please? Yeah.
Claudette Taylor, the Diocese of Toronto. This motion is something that means a lot to many of us, and I'm really grateful for what I've heard from Brittany and what seems to be happening in the church. I just want to talk a little bit about the report and then the motion. The report from the committee, the Dismantling Racism Task Force, recognizes that learning and engagement at every step of faith formation is critical when we are talking about dismantling racism. And this learning and engagement is integrated into the life of the church, from young children to people who are engaged in ordained ministry or even church leadership. By looking at this aspect of faith formation, there are several advantages. One being, it enriches our theological understanding. It gives us more opportunities for new forms of ministry and leadership, using the gifts that people bring into the conversations. And not only that, but it upholds the dignity of all of us as God's children. Now, as Brittany said, all of these things are happening at some levels. And what the Dismantling Racism has in the motion is they recognize that this is taking place, but they are seeking to build on what is already happening, what has happened 30 years ago, or what is happening right now in the Anglican Church, because people are doing this type of work. They are trying to bring together the stakeholders to discuss, share their best practices, and work together to develop that framework where continuous development exists or happens. So, having said that, the motion calls for the church to compile a database with available resources and offer a place where anybody, any interested Anglican, can access resources that deal with anti-Black racism or racism. This motion on its own, and Brittany did mention that, she said, we know that results won't happen immediately, but it's a step in the right direction. So I ask for us as a group of people to consider what we are doing and for what we are saying yes to, and recognizing the many gifts, the many opportunities that we are being presented with today. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the seconder wish to speak? Lynn?
Just a point of order.
If you could just wait a minute, I'd like the seconder to speak, and then I will discuss what we're going to do with this motion, because I realize there's a problem at the moment.
Let me reserve my right till later.
Thank you. Okay. We've just realized, of course, that we cannot vote on this motion at this time because it presumes that A200 has passed. But we could enter into the discussion of this motion if people wish to discuss the content of this motion at this time and leave the voting of it until we come back to A200. So I'd like to ask if there is any comment that people wish to make on this motion, to discuss it, to debate it now. Finding time later will be challenging, and if we can move directly to the vote at that time, it would be helpful. So if there's a comment on the content of A202, please come to the microphone. Microphone 2, Bishop Sandra.
Sandra Fife, Diocese of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. And I would only just say that, and when we talk about things, could the motion stay up? I would have brought my, when we talk about formation contexts like Sunday schools, lay training programs, seasonal programs, youth ministry, and theological education, we talk about resources in a broad way, but I would like us to think even more broadly, because even visually, what exists in our church buildings and the places where we study and worship matter. Stained glass windows, the liturgical vestments and hangings, all of these. And I was in a church where all of the images in our stained glass windows, we only had one, but were white faces, and we had a significant black population in that parish. And that was something that came out as we did visioning work in that parish. So I just think this might limit us to be thinking about printed resources and images in those printed resources, and not thinking about liturgical space and all those other things that where we also need to see the diversity of our population reflected through the Anglican Church of Canada. Thank you.
Microphone 1.
John Rye, Saskatchewan. I was really happy to read this motion because, like weeds in the garden, racism goes really deep. The colonial secretary in the British government lived in the same house as the Prime Minister for just under 200 years. So yes, it's deep. The way in which evolution has been taught over those 150 years has actually built up racism. So we need to listen to what we were told earlier this afternoon. We need to go around the world to the theological colleges and seminaries in Africa. We need to go and look at the colleges back in Britain that have done deep, deep research into these subjects in order to find out where the roots of this come from. I have helped people who have come in from various cultures and various places. In our particular town, it has been very difficult to integrate people from Nigeria and Ghana into our existing Anglican churches, and they have set up separate churches which are part of denominations which have come out of a post-colonial foundation. So yes, I am enthusiastically in support of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Microphone 2.
Emma Vickery, the Diocese of Caledonia. I was fortunate to go on the Theological Student International Internship Program to Jamaica, and I wanted to say that beyond just curriculum, having that experience has helped me throughout my ministry, especially connecting with people from all over the Caribbean, particularly, not just from Jamaica. And it also gave me a good experience around racism and what, coming from being a white person, I was able to have a different type of experience. And so I think that broader sense of looking at those frameworks and encouraging students to participate in those types of overseas programs.
Thank you. Microphone 1. Please pull down the microphone a wee bit so we can hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Gail Smith, Diocese of Toronto. First, I speak in favor of this motion, and I too will require that it be put back up. Thank you. First, I speak in favor of these motions. However, I'd like to note a couple of things. The number one is asking that these governing bodies or instructive bodies develop a process or a framework to examine and support. My point being that it sounds as though there's continued conversation. It doesn't sound as though there's specific, definitive calls to action so that change can come. I was observing this room while these motions have been discussed. And it's sad to see how many people were in their phones and on their laptops as though disinterested in the topic. This is a very important topic. And I know that because in my work and in my profession, I've been asked to do some work with respect to facilitating either the reduction of racism or helping others to figure out how they can help clients, Black clients in particular. And so I know how difficult this work can be, but I also know how important it can be. And as I say, I am very saddened to see how many people have not engaged in this conversation, or at least it's the appearance of. I shouldn't make accusations, it's the appearance of. And so that's number one. I think that the motion could have been stronger, but I am so very grateful for the motion as it is. That's number one. Number two, I'd like to comment about what the last speaker indicated with respect to our spaces, because what we see, many people are visual learners, and therefore what we see informs what we learn and what we believe. I can say that, again, in the work that I do, I had to enter a building that there was a big, gorgeous stained glass window that was supposed to reflect Toronto, and I suspect that it was supposed to reflect Toronto in the early days, or when it was first being developed. I can tell you that the only image, the only person in that particular window that was shirtless was a Black man. And I had to see this every time I went to that particular structure.
You have 10 seconds.
Thank you. So my last point is then that this being as important as it is, I had to ask the question at my table is who gets to decide how much training existing clergy have to undertake? And I would ask that every bishop in this room make it mandatory that it be part of the continuing professional development of your clergy in your diocese to undertake some sort of training, anti-racism, training because it's that important. And other professions are required to do continuing professional development. So I think this is one where we could do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone 2.
Nancy McLeod, Diocese of Ontario. The previous speaker has already spoken to one of the things that I want to say, but I wanted to just address that second point that says, that speaks of the creation of resources that can be used broadly. And I ask our bishops and our clergy and our lay leaders to not take that as a can. And I share advice from an ecumenical colleague who was talking about raising children, and if the children wanted to do something that they weren't sure about, he would say to them, "Convince me." And I would say this is a situation in which if there is any pushback against using these resources, we would want to say, "Convince me why," because this is something we all need to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you. We will need to stop the debate at this time. We will come back to this motion after the Indigenous community has had a chance to consult about the other motion. I need to say also that the third motion must wait until that time as well, because it carries the same implication as the first motion in it. So I would ask the Indigenous community to discuss both A200 and A202 in order that we get them the way that they need to be in order for the whole of the General Synod to address them well and properly. Vince?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not sure if this is procedure or not. Vince Solomon, Anglican Council of Indigenous People. Do we still need, though, to discuss the other one because there are other issues with number 3?
Yes, we'll have to discuss that when it comes back to the floor, because we've not had the opportunity to finish the discussion on A200. We will need to finish the discussion on this one and vote on it after we vote on A200. And then we'll need to consider A202, which has similar implications to A200.
Okay.
It is just about 5 after 5, and it is time for our meal break. We will gather again here at 7 p.m. for the first session from the Strategic Planning Working Group, and then conclude with the first of our sessions jointly with the Lutherans. Can I just say a brief comment on that? Tonight we're going to ask you to do something that you may think is a little odd, but it's in the spirit of hospitality. At the end of the SPWG session, we will ask you at 8:15 to clear the room, so that when we come back into the room for evening prayer, we come back with the Lutherans together. We're not asking them to come into a room in which we're already present as if they're guests. We are not guests in each other's place. We are family together. So we will ask you to leave and just to stay in the local area until the doors reopen and we can come in together with the Lutherans and worship together tonight. So just a warning that that will be happening. Thank you. And you will change tables at that time. The ASM table that's on your list will happen at that time.